Welcome, welcome, welcome to Chess.com's top 5 countdown of the best games from the year 2019. It's gone, it's over, it's in the books. Say goodbye, but not before you watch this video and give us a subscribe down low. Let's check out things as they were in 2019 as far as how the Chess.com staff voted them. We start right here with this battle between Mchedlishvili and Rathnakaran, where it seems that the move that has been played many times, and the only move that ever been played in this position, queen takes d5, should be played. You're down a pawn, the knight is pinned, let's just regain that material. Rathnakaran instead decided to bring the wrath and play knight takes d5. A double exclam move, and don't ask me to apologize, because when you give up a queen before move 10 and do so to have long-term compensation like this, it's absolutely bananas. He now played the move knight takes e2 check, which of course is perfect to keep the white king in the center and off balance. You can't take, because now you're giving me back my material with interest. That meant that white had to keep the king in the center. And after queen to e3, we have the one moment where I'm going to ask you to pause the video and try to play the brilliant move that Rathnakaran did here. It's another double exclam in my book, and it is bishop to e6. We don't want to take back material in games where we've already sacrificed too much to get back anyway. And what I mean by that is that when your opponent has a major piece, and let's say you have a bunch of small pieces, if that major piece can start exerting pressure, your minors will often never get coordinated or get active. A line that shows that is right here. Queen g5 check, and we take the pawn, followed by rapid development. And in a few moves, it's actually white who has the more dominant, coordinated-looking minor pieces, where black is struggling for activity. So what's fascinating about this game is that Rathnakaran only has one piece for the queen right now. That's not a lot, but he still does the right principled thing to make sure he emphasizes activity with the move bishop e6, and points out that if you just try to keep your material and take pawns, I have rook c8, bringing one more piece to the file, and then king f7, bringing the next piece to the file. And if you really want to see the full analysis of it, you can check out the video I did at Chess.com for premium members and my blog, where I break down all the fancy ways black can checkmate. In the game, white didn't play bishop takes c7 and instead played bishop g5, but lost back material, desperately trying to guard the d8 square. And after he ran out of ways to do it, black castled long and went on to win in a brilliant attack where the minors dominated the queen and ultimately got things going against the king on the first rank. That was number 5. Let's check out what took the 4 spot here in our 2019 countdown. Taking the number 4 spot from Chess.com's point of view was this amazing game by international master Korley as black taking on Grandmaster Alexander Moiseenko. Now, in what was or had been up to this game a traditional Queen's Gambit decline structure with nothing too fancy going on, white does the right thing in this position to justify the last move f3 by playing the move e4. This is the idea in this Queen Gambit structure. When you haven't gone for a minority attack, you're trying to get a big center and then tell some tales about it. The problem is that Korley came very well prepared. He's a friend of mine. I know he knows how to use the engine. And in this position, he shocked his higher rated opponent by sacrificing not just one knight on e4, but 2 knights, and then winning the bishop, with it launching what was about to be a brilliant attack. Now, after rook f2, black plays bishop takes h3. Let's bring more pieces in. But rook d1 was played because it doesn't seem like black has the knockout blow, at least not now, and really put the pressure on Korley to justify his 2-knight sacrifice. It's my time to put some pressure on you, as we're going to do at least once in every one of these games, and try to solve the finishing touch here for black. It's the only way for black to justify this attack, and the reason why this game was voted into our top 5. Assuming you've done so, I'm going to tell you that a lot of you might have even suggested rook to e6. Makes sense, you're threatening rook g6 check. The problem is, after e takes d5, I guard that square with my bishop, and your rook lift, while fancy, is sort of wasted. There is another way to do a rook lift that maybe some of you found. The move rook to e5, are you kidding me? Double exclam, you already down a piece, you sacrifice a rook for a pawn, not even because you're going to use the G file necessarily with the rook, but because you've opened up a new avenue that exposes the f2 rook and points out that while white is up a ton of material, he doesn't have easy ways to coordinate them to defend against obvious checkmate threats coming. Queen takes f2 and queen g2 follows. In the game, white played knight d4. We're going to show why that doesn't work in a second. Rook f1 was the only other try. I'm not going to say it saved the game at all, but it would have gone to a less lost position. After the move bishop takes f1, you have knight d1. That's the whole point. You free the square. And white has to transition into the endgame. And when I say has to, it's not a problem. Black has a rook and 3 pawns. Count them, 3 pawns for the minor pieces. So Korley should have and would have gone on to win that game if that had happened. The 2 knight sacrifice is justified. But in the game, Moiseenko doesn't find that. He plays knight d4, thinking that he has plenty of time to defend with doubled rooks on the second rank. But after queen g3, king h1, I lied. I'm going to give you 2 chances to try to play like the brilliant Casa Korley. And if you did so, good on you. Bishop to g4 finishes things off. There's no way to stop bishop to f3 check. If you take it, I mate you on g1. Because of that, black played bishop to f1 to try to meet bishop f3 check with bishop g2, but that doesn't solve anything. After queen h3 and queen takes g2, the finish is over. Finish him, might as well get some sub-zero action, whoopah, right? And with that, number 4 is in the books. Let's check out our 3rd best game from the year 2019. Game number 3 between Ivan Saric and Aydin Suleymanli has us wondering how exactly an endgame made it into the top 5. But when you see the finish here for white, you're gonna understand why we really loved what we saw. Now, in this position, you're facing a critical decision. White sacrificed the exchange and got some pretty good compensation for it. Played rather brilliantly in my mind up to here, but now the rooks are finally getting the job done. This tower is blocking the h-pawn, and this tower is about to help the b-pawn become a real boy or girl on b1, whatever his or her life choice is. But if you calculate fast here as white, you might find a way to justify the entire exchange sack with further sacrifices and show that sometimes the little people can get things done around here, even if your opponent has 2 big towers of power. In this position, Saric plays bishop e2, ignoring the infiltration of the second rank, ignoring the threat of coming to b2, which has a threat of rook c1, and I'm going to get a new queen, because the intention the entire time was to just part ways with the last remaining rook and have the pawns do the job against the rooks and bishop and king. And I meant to say all of those pieces, the rooks and bishop and king. Flipping bananas, right? In this position, the pawns get out of control, they are unchained, and they start to run up the board right after bishop g8. Keep that rook out of play, improve the knight temporarily, but not even because we're really trying to guard c3. It's because we're going to start using our peshki, and here come the boys. The d-pawn joins the fight. The e-pawn is not too far to follow. Knight takes c4, pointing out you can't take because you give me a queen, so that takes advantage of the bishop's sort of impotence and guards the d6 pawn at the same time. Black gets himself off the discovered check, but it's too little too late. Once the other pawns get going, they are too fast, running up the board. Now, in this moment, as much as we loved this game, and we did vote it in purely because of the beautifulness of the pawns, I'm not going to lie. Full disclosure, Black had one opportunity that I analyzed with the engine right here, right now, a forced draw that he missed. Really hard to blame Mr. Suleymanli, because when you face this kind of pawn pressure, a lot of people crack. In the game, he played the move rook takes d7, which was kind of a defensive sacrifice he had been preparing all along, a chance to give back all the pieces and get a draw. But there was only one right way to give back all the pieces and fight for equality. You had to take with the king on e7, giving up the bishop on e8, and then quickly bring the other rook to g5 and give up even more material to reach a position where the rook stands a fighting chance to draw here against the knight and 2 pawns. Unfortunately, Suleymanli did not find this, played the defensive sacrifice he had been planning all along with rook takes d7, and after takes, bishop takes, the finishing touch was rather brilliant for Saric because it had to do with the proper foresight of why we study our king and pawn endings. Knight to b6 was the move that Suleymanli missed. A surprising move because he thought he could take e7, and then the king would surely get back in time for me to sacrifice my rook and get a drawn king and pawn ending. Unfortunately, the white king understood that idea and shoulders him just in time. The shouldering method is a very educational takeaway because often in these positions, players assume just come straight forward, right? The problem with coming straight forward in these types of endgames is that when the enemy king gets here, you are actually the one who's blocked from accessing the next rank. And if you advance your pawns too far, now your pawn is in front of your king, and indeed, these endgames can be drawn. These king and pawn endings can be drawn if the sacrifice is made at the right time. So you don't want the pawn to get in front of the king. Instead, you shoulder the king by bringing it to the king's side and entering to the 5th rank in a square that is just out of the reach of the black king, and indeed Suleymanli resigned. Let me show you the finish of the king and pawn ending as it would be. The king goes to g7. Rather than taking the square with the pawn, we play king g5, and if the sacrifice on g8 happens, we get king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th, which is always what you want. It always wins the game, because even if it's white to move, you have the timing to slide over and march the pawn up, ultimately arriving at h7 and welcoming your brand new baby girl, Gabriella, because it starts with a G to the G8 square. Obviously, if it was black to move, you always win king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th, because you just take the square they've given up. But a very, very brilliant finish here from Saric, timing it perfectly, gets to h5. Suleymanli resigns, and he earns our number 3 spot for best game with this awesome exchange sacrifice and runaway of the pawns. Coming up, let's take a look at number 2. Number 2 coming at us right now from the young and rising Russian star. We might as well just call him a superstar at this point, Daniil Dubov. He is the second of Magnus Carlsen. He is feared by many for his preparation with computers like Leela and AlphaZero, and nothing was more impressive by him on the board himself than this win versus Rasmus Svane in 2019. Now, the thing that I love about this position is the combination that starts here truly exposes an engine oversight. And again, how often do we get to say that anymore as humans? The engines can think for a very long time, but they have a very, very difficult time seeing the mating net that was in store for Mr. Svane as the combination gets underway. But Dubov had already played a brilliant novelty by castling long, bringing the knight to g5 and launching a kingside attack with no justification. At least we didn't think so as far as chess principles went. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. He gets a brilliant opportunity to finish the game in style. Check out the full video over at Chess.com as well as my blog for the other analysis I'm mentioning. But this moment right here was why it took the number 2 spot. And here we go. Knight to d5. We remove the defender from f6 to bring in the rook to h7. Why, you ask? Just so we can give up more material by taking on f7. Currently, white is down a rook and a piece, but all of that will not be for naught. After queen takes g6, rook, king to f8, we have queen h6, rook g7, and bishop takes d5. Now, this position is amazing. The threat of queen h8, followed by rook g8 and queen takes mate, puts black in an almost impossible to solve spot. In fact, there was no clear solution. In the game, he played king e8, which you can hardly blame him because even the engines have a hard time seeing why that's a problem. But the best move here was the move bishop to f5, the only way for Svane to stay in the game. It allows e4 and actually allows the attack to continue with a further sacrifice. Really hard to justify going for this because, again, just about anything here still falls to mate. Things like queen e7, we have ideas of f6 and bishop c6. Things like moving the rook still run into different types of mating nets here. There's no clear way that black even gets out of it, but at least there was a chance to survive in some critical variations, again, that I went over in the full video over on Chess.com. But the main thing here is that black can hardly be blamed for not going for bishop f5 check, because when he plays the move king e8, it seems like there's a path to a draw. How is white going to deliver the goods? After queen h5, king d7, indeed, Dubov kind of feigns like he agrees. He plays a little bit of tickle, brings the king to d7, and maybe he's moments away from considering a draw. Just kidding. I was lying about that. Not so fast. He wasn't moments away from considering a draw. He was moments away from proving Svane wrong by playing the move bishop to e6 check and saying, actually, there is more than a perpetual here, because after king to c6, we have queen to f3 check. We bring the queen back into the game, and this is your moment to pause the video and find the final combination that Dubov played that is literally a forced mate in 10, according to the engine. See if you can do it. Come on. I believe in you. Pause the video. Forced mate in 10. Don't go look up the game. Don't do that. Don't just, come on. Pause the video and see if you can solve yourself some Puzzle Rush style forced mate in 10. The move is The combination begins with bishop takes c4. Sacrifice more material because you don't need it anyway at this point. Checkmate is all that matters. The whole idea is not only do you force the king further into your territory, but you start removing key defenders of the c-file, helping the only pieces that weren't in the game get involved. That's exactly why things like king takes c4 don't work, because white comes in too quickly to the c-file. In the game, black played king a5, and after queen d5 check, blocks with the bishop, but the mate continues with b4, king a4, and if you want to pause the video one last time, you have like 2 seconds to do it. The finishing touch was queen to g2, threatening queen to c2 and queen to b3 mate. Bishop takes b4 is played so that queen to c2 can allow king a5, but that one move opens up the c-file for a temporary moment, and Dubov takes advantage of it by coming back to c6 and playing the move bishop to b3, which threatens not just queen a4 mate, but also an even fancier mate in 3 that you can solve after bishop d7 if you're fast, or I'm going to show you queen to c1, king takes, queen c2, and queen a2. This combination that started, if I know you're like, hey, that was a lot to take in, let's back up. You're welcome, I'm going to do that. It really started all the way back with knight to d5, and it was a position that, again, super brilliant, not only because it came from the attack that it did, but because the engines couldn't even really see just how white was going to be able to deliver the finishing touches. But to see it in real action by this brilliant guy who will be a household name for many years to come, definitely one of my favorite games. It was actually the game I personally voted #1, full confession time here, but that's not because our next game is not just as brilliant and going to leave you breathless. With that, let's dive into our top game of 2019. Here we go, baby. It's #1, and you see a name, Alireza Firouzja, right? You see his face now in front of you. Normally, he's on the brilliancy side of these brilliancy things. Unfortunately for him, Karthikeyan had other things in mind. In this game that was already instructive as far as the improvements being made to the King's Indian, I'm going to dive into the critical moment and show you. Firouzja, facing kind of a weird queen a5, does the principled thing, says the queen's a target out there, and let's go kick her out of my house, right? Go home, little lady. And she says, I have other plans. Queen takes c3, double exclam, sacrificing a queen before move 10. Again, not something you see every day, except I guess twice in this top 5 video series countdown, to take e3. But unlike any of the other sacrifices to this game, I literally spent hours analyzing this and have no real ways that white could have improved upon it. The one moment is right here, right now, if Alireza realizes he needs to quickly try to give back as much material as possible in hopes to safeguard the king. The problem is that even that doesn't necessarily help, because even if he found the move rook g1 to give up the pawn with check, black doesn't have to take back the material and ultimately allow white to do things like win the e3 pawn and sit with a safe king on e3. Black can actually just keep the pieces on the board and continue to dominate on the dark squares. And what you're going to find if you let the engines think here is that they tend to agree. Black has plenty of compensation, and how often do we get to say that? We talk about practical elements when we sacrifice queens early. We talk about how shocking and amazing and beautiful it was, okay, even though it really wasn't objectively the right decision. Not the case with this combination and why it took our #1. Just an absolutely brilliant move that forces us to remember the truths of chess, which is that squares, the initiative, threats, king safety are the things that really matter in chess, not just material, right? Material should be seen as the tools we use to expose and build on those weaknesses, but it's a means to an end. And that's exactly what happens here on the dark squares for Firouzja, meaning he finds his end. He played queen to c1 instead of giving the pawn back. That was the only chance to even keep it murky, and black never looks back. Bishop h6, we're already threatening things like knight g3 and things with e2. So g4 played to give a little freedom, but after knight f4, you can't take e3 because of knight g2 check, winning back material and up a piece. King d1, we have knight e6. Black was threatening e2 check, winning the queen again. King c2, another piece joins the fight. We keep the bishop on this diagonal, not going to allow g5 to close it out. And again, the crazy thing about this game is these are not the kind of moves you normally see Alireza Firouzja play. Defensive, passive moves. Normally he's the guy on the attack. Black makes a threat on a4, brings another piece into the game, just dominating despite being down a queen, relocates the bishop to the dark square diagonal of which he started there after the fianchetto, and after a few more moves, finishes things off in style. especially with this very nice move, rook c5, that keeps all kinds of threats alive, doubling rooks. The bishop can now come to c6 without blocking the rook on c8. f5 is an idea. The pieces are dominating the queen. She has no targets. And in this last critical moment right here, let you pause the video and find the way that Karthikeyan finishes the game here against Alireza Firouzja. Sometimes you do everything you can with the pieces against the queen, and then you cash in your chips and go to a winning endgame. And if you took the time to solve it, then you definitely found bishop takes c3. Very nice. You get the discovery on the queen and take away the last real critical defender of the king on c2. In the game, Alireza tries to bail out by sacrificing the queen back for a bunch of material. It doesn't work. The only other try was a move, let's say we move the queen to anywhere with safety. A fun line I gave just to show how the pieces come to life now that the c-pawn is gone. Starts with bishop to e5. We trade, and then the pieces start coming after the king. And my favorite finish of any of the games we did in this video is right here. Knight c4 check, rook b2, forced mate in 3, and with it, you get to tell mom and dad that you checkmated a king on d5 with a knight. And they'll be like, how is that even possible? You can't do that. You can't checkmate a king with only a knight on d5. There's so many center squares. I don't know why mom and dad talk like this, but, right? That sounds more like my teenager. Okay. Anyway, bishop takes c3. Brilliant stuff. I hope you found it. And after queen takes c5, they headed to an endgame where, yes, with a little bit of technique required, black converts it. Unfortunately, the end of our 2019 Best Games Countdown doesn't get to come to a close with checkmates. But still a nice conversion, capped off with this great move here, h6, which is a well-calculated combination, preventing the rook from dominating the 7th rank, because after taking h4, white has to prevent the 2 pawns. And if you come back to the 7th rank, black gets here just in time and wins the game. So because of that, instead, we had the variation we did, where ultimately the pawns became just one too many for Mr. Firouzja, and he resigns. Borderline Zugzwang here at the end of the game. So with that, we bring our top 5 games of 2019 video to a close. As I've mentioned a few times, you can check out full reviews of each of these games where I dive into the opening, more educational takeaways, and some heavy lifting analysis over at Chess.com, both in my blog as well as the premium videos for all Diamond members. So thanks for tuning in. Give us a like, give us a share if you like our Best of 2019 Countdown, and we'll see you around on Chess.com.